Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our slippers and stepping back in time into a world where baths were suspicious, toothpaste was practically sorcery, and personal hygiene was, well, optional. You wake up in a scratchy straw bed, the morning sun piercing through the cracks in your wooden shutters, and the first thing you notice, your breath. It's not great. It's the kind of breath that could peel paint if paint existed on your damp stone walls. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes with hands that haven't seen soap in. Honestly, who knows? No toothbrush on the nightstand. No minty mouthwash swirling in a glass. Just the tangy reminder of yesterday's onion stew, and maybe a hint of stale ale from last night's goblet. Welcome to Hygiene in the Middle Ages. You're going to smell medieval. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little village of ours reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle to your feet, your breath lingering around like an uninvited guest. If you're lucky, and that's a big if you might have access to a twig from a licorice plant or a frayed piece of cloth dipped in salt water, that's the extent of your dental arsenal. Charcoal ashes and crushed herbs might also get rubbed across your teeth if you're feeling fancy, or if your mother-in-law's visiting. Historians still argue whether most peasants even bothered with oral care at all, or if the effort was reserved for those with the luxury of time and a full set of teeth. Some records suggest nobles used toothpicks carved from bone or silver to fish out bits of lamb or fish from between molars, arguably more for etiquette than hygiene. Your teeth feel fuzzy. That's normal here. In fact, morning mouth is just called mouth. Tooth decay is a fact of life. You're expected to lose a few teeth by your 30s, maybe earlier. If one starts to ache, the village barber will pull it out. No numbing gel, no antiseptic rinse. Just grip, tug, and hope you don't black out or die of infection. You pick up a bit of cloth one you've used before and will likely use again and rub it roughly across your front teeth. It helps a little. Sort of. At least now your tongue doesn't stick to your molars. Maybe you'll chew on a mint leaf later if your neighbour's garden hasn't been picked clean. And what about gums, swollen, bleeding, receding? It's all par for the course. There's no real understanding of gingivitis. If your breath could kill a basilisk, they'll just assume it's a result of unbalanced humours, or perhaps divine punishment. Either way, no one's sending you to a dentist. Those don't exist yet, not really. Fun fact, some medieval remedies for bad breath involved rinsing the mouth with vinegar wine or even urine. Yes, you heard that right. And before you gag, keep in mind that medieval people were a bit looser with what they considered medicinal. Natural meant effective. Sometimes, maybe, not always. Okay, rarely. You glance over at the family dog curled on the floor scratching his fleas. Honestly, he's probably got better oral hygiene. You've seen him chew on mint and eat grass like he's prepping for a cleanse. But here's the kicker. Despite all this, medieval people weren't totally ignorant of cleanliness. They cared. They just lacked access to materials we now take for granted, like fluoride toothpaste or electric brushes. When you only bathe once a month and your diet's heavy in porridge and mead, bad breath is more of a team effort. Some monks wrote about oral care in their medicinal texts. Recipes for mouthwashes made from sage vinegar or even powdered pearls surface in dusty old scrolls. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread or confined to wealthier enclaves. Either way, you won't find a dental hygienist walking the cobbled streets of your village. You peer into a crude bronze mirror hanging on the wall. Your teeth are there, mostly. Yellowed, slightly wobbly, and shaped like tiny gravestones. But no one's judging. Everyone else's teeth look like that too, unless you're talking about the bishop. He gets his polished with burnt rosemary ash by a young scribe with too much time on his hands. It's time to start your day. And while you might still be emitting the aroma of fermented onions and mystery meat, at least now, your mouth's seen a scrap of linen and maybe a little salt. Call it a win. You grab your cloak, scratch your neck, and step into the muddy street ready to face a world that smells just as ripe as you do. You step out into the crisp morning air, or at least what passes for crisp in a village where pigs roam freely, and the nearest latrine is a pit behind the tavern. Your feet crunch against straw muck, and something else you'd rather not identify. Before heading to your day's work, you pause for a moment. Should you wash your hands? You glance down at them. They're already sporting a thin layer of grime from yesterday's chores, firewood hauling, sheep wrangling, and maybe a touch of fermented cabbage juice. But washing hands in medieval times, that's a surprisingly complex idea. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person cared about hand washing. in the way we understand it today. Spoiler, they usually didn't. There was no germ theory yet, no concept that invisible bacteria could ride in on your fingertips and crash your immune system like an unwelcome houseguest. Instead, cleanliness was often tied to ritual or social standing. You might wash your hands before a meal, especially if you're a guest in a noble house. But even then, it's more about etiquette than sanitation. Nobles would pour rose water or vinegar over their fingers before feasting, catching the runoff in elaborate silver basins, all while a servant held a linen towel at the ready. It was a performance of refinement, not a sterile scrub down. If you're a peasant, like most people, where washing your hands might involve a quick splash in the same bucket used for dishes laundry, and maybe the family goat. No soap, of course. Not unless you're fortunate enough to have made some from animal fat and ashes, or you're close with a soap maker, a rare and often smelly profession. Soap, by the way, was considered suspicious in some circles, a bit too luxurious, a bit too French. There were even periods where it was believed too much washing weakened the body or tempted the soul. Cleanliness could be seen as vanity, dirt that was humble, honest, God-fearing. Still, some professions required a cleaner touch. If you're a cook or a baker, you're expected to keep your hands somewhat clean, mostly so you don't ruin the dough, not because anyone's afraid of foodborne illness. Likewise, monks might wash their hands more frequently as part of their religious observances, especially before prayers or handling sacred objects. Though let's be honest, clean is a flexible term in a world without antibacterial anything. For most people, though, hands were simply tools. You wiped them on your tunic, on the dog, on the wall, maybe even on your neighbour if they were standing too close and not paying attention. You wander over to the wooden basin near your front door. The water's cold, a bit cloudy, and smells faintly of old carrots. You dip your hands in anyway and rub them together. It helps. A little. Maybe. You notice the dirt just sort of rearranges itself across your fingers. You reach for a rag that's been hanging on a peg for a week and give your hands a half-hearted wipe. Congratulations. You are now medieval clean, which is to say less filthy than before. It's worth noting that not everyone ignored hand hygiene. In the Islamic world, hand-washing was a daily religious obligation, and contact with Europe during the Crusades may have nudged some awareness in this direction. But within medieval Christendom it was patchy at best. One lord might insist on a wash basin at every doorway. Another might see that as indulgent nonsense. You pass a couple of children playing in the mud. One licks their fingers after touching something that might have once been a frog. Hygiene just isn't part of their daily instruction. If anything, dirt is seen as strengthening. You don't get tougher by scrubbing your hands all day, right? A fun fringe tidbit. Some herbal manuals recommended rubbing one's hands with goose fat or ox gall to protect them from miasmas, bad airs that were thought to cause disease. There's no evidence it worked, but hey, at least you were moisturised. As you walk toward the fields, hands still slightly damp and slightly sticky, you realise something. Everyone's hands are dirty. The butcher, the baker, the alewife, the priest. It's a shared state of being part of the communal medieval experience. If you're clean, you're suspicious. What are you hiding? Who are you trying to impress? Besides, any washing you did would be undone in minutes. You'll be milking cows, gutting fish, or tending to a smoky hearth before long. Best not to get too precious about it. Still, when you finally sit down for your midday meal bread, maybe cheese, something that used to be an onion, you find yourself wiping your fingers again. Not for health, just so the crumbs stick better. And that, in a nutshell, is the medieval approach to hand hygiene, somewhere between bare minimum and why bother. But don't worry, you'll get a full body rinse, eventually. Maybe, once the seasons change. You've made it to the communal table, an uneven plank balanced across two barrels in the open air. It's breakfast time, though the word breakfast is generous when you're served a hunk of rye bread, so tough it might double as a roofing tile. You tear it with your hands, which you cleaned earlier though. By now they've collected a new dusting of sheep fuzz dirt and something suspiciously sticky from a passing goose. No forks, no knives unless you brought your own. Just fingers. Fingers that have fed pigs, stoked fires, and maybe picked at an itchy boil or two since you woke up. And you're not alone, everyone eats with hands, from the blacksmith to the bailiff, to the kids throwing crusts to the chickens. You bite into the bread and wonder just for a fleeting second how many hands have touched it before you. The bakers, the apprentices, possibly the miller's horse if it carried the sack of grain. But hygiene isn't a major concern here. If anything, the more aged your food is, the more flavourful. Or at least that's what people tell themselves. Historians still argue whether medieval people were aware of contamination in a way we'd recognise. Some evidence shows an understanding of clean versus unclean objects, especially in religious contexts. Monasteries, for example, often had rules for cleanliness and food preparation. But outside those stone walls, the average villager operated more on tradition and habit than any sense of microbial danger. So here you are eating boiled turnip and yesterday's lentils with your bare hands, probably sitting beside someone who just came straight from mucking out the stables. And if your hands get sticky, no problem. You wipe them on your tunic. That's what the tunic's for, right? You glance at the neighbour across from you. He's gnawing on a drumstick with admirable determination. His fingernails are black, not a bit dirty black. More like could plant seeds under their black. But no one blinks. Everyone's fingernails look like that. Scrubbing under them is rare. Manicures. Please. The only clipping tool most people have is a knife they also use to gut fish. If you're particularly lucky, you might eat from a shared wooden bowl dipping in alongside others. If not, you're scooping food off a leaf, a flat rock, or directly from the pot with your hands. The concept of personal cutlery is mostly for the rich. Peasants do communal dining and fingers are always on the menu. There's some effort at order, mind you. In noble households, people wash before meals, remember Section 2, and dry their hands on designated towels or even each other's sleeves. There are hand-washing rituals complete with scented water and fancy basins. But in your little hamlet, it's more like wipe and dig in. One fun, strange tidbit: in some areas, it was considered polite to eat with only the first 3 fingers. Using all 5 was seen as greedy or even barbaric. You try this for a second, delicately pinching a bean from the pile, and promptly drop it into your lap. That's enough etiquette for today. And let's talk about leftovers. There's no fridge, no icebox. Food is kept as long as it looks fine or smells tolerable. Mould, just scrape it off. Reheat stew for the 3rd time? Absolutely. Waste not, want not. Which means your breakfast might have had a brief career as last night's dinner and someone else's lunch 2 days ago. You sip from a wooden cup filled with weak ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. Because water is often more dangerous than booze. You don't boil water unless it's for soup, but ale brewed and fermented. Safer, sort of. Unless the brewer was drunk that day and forgot to clean the vat. Still, the warm buzz settles your nerves. Or maybe it's the carbs. Either way, you feel ready to face the morning slightly hungover, slightly grimy, and still chewing with a molar that might fall out before autumn. Now someone sneezes into the food bowl, a wet gloppy sneeze. You will pretend it didn't happen. Because what are you going to do? Make a new bowl, burn the food, call the health inspector. You finish your meal licking your fingers. Then out of a vague sense of decency, you wipe your hands on a patch of grass before heading out to work. This is as hygienic as it gets. And honestly, it's just normal. After all, you're living in a time when nobody expects sterility. People are strong, they say. They're hardy. Little dirt never hurt anyone. Unless it did. You head back toward your cottage, tugging at the woolen cap on your head, not for warmth, but for containment. Because if there's one thing that's certain in your medieval routine, it's that your hair has opinions. It's oily, tangled, and itching in ways you've chosen to emotionally detach from. But what can you do? Hair care in the Middle Ages is more about endurance than aesthetics. You duck inside and take a look at the wooden comb on your shelf. It's missing a few teeth, probably borrowed by a sibling or chewed on by the dog. Still, it's all you've got. Made from bone or wood, the comb does its job poorly. You run it through your hair, and a satisfying snap confirms you've just broken off a knot the size of a walnut. Historians still argue whether medieval people saw hair cleanliness as a regular priority, or more of an occasional ordeal. What we do know is that attitudes varied wildly depending on region, religion, and whether you were more peasant than prince. In some places, oily hair was considered healthy. It meant your body was balanced. In others, especially religious communities, shaving the head, or covering it entirely, was the more righteous route. You inspect the comb. Something moves. A louse, probably. You flick it off and try not to think about how many friends it might have. Lice, nits and fleas are more reliable companions than most village gossip. Everyone has them. Some people even swap home remedies. One involves crushed garlic, another vinegar. A third, just give up and cut your hair with shears you also use on sheep. Speaking of cutting, hairstyles in this era are about function, not flair. Long hair means it tangles in the windmill. Short hair means your neck gets sunburned. You choose medium like most people and cover it with a hood or kerchief to keep the filth in and, ironically, the lice from spreading too much to others. Not that it helps. Washing your hair, that's an ordeal. You'd need water time and something like soap. But soap is a luxury, and washing your head with plain water just moves the grease around. Some people use lye soap made from ash and fat, which technically cleans the hair but also leaves it brittle dry and vaguely smelling like smoked ham. You once tried rinsing with rainwater after a storm. It worked okay until you got a cold that lingered for a week. Some folks say a good rinse in a river helps if you don't mind the eels, or the fact that someone's probably dumping laundry just upstream. The irony hair was often the cleanest looking part of a person, if only because it was covered most of the time. Veils, hats, caps, these weren't just fashion. They were shields against dirt, sun, and public scrutiny. You've heard the tale of a woman fined in town for walking bareheaded. It wasn't modesty, it was hygiene theatre. Here's a fringe tidbit some medieval people believed hair absorbed sin. Yes, really. That's why monks shaved theirs. Nuns covered theirs. The cleaner the soul, the less visible the hair. Some religious texts even suggested that washing hair too often was an indulgence of vanity. So you keep your indulgences to a minimum and your hat on tight. You feel another itch, probably another louse. You consider asking the local healer for a paste made of crushed herbs and lamb's urine. It's supposed to kill parasites. Or you could just set your hat in the sun and hope the heat roasts whatever's inside. That's a real method, by the way, sunbaking your headgear. Still, there's a part of you that dreams of pouring warm water over your head, lathering it with something fragrant, and letting it run down your back without worrying about wasting firewood or freezing to death. But that's a dream for another century. For now, you tie a strip of linen around your hair, roll your sleeves, and get ready for another day of sweat dirt and whatever the barn decides to throw at you. Your hair will manage. It always does. And as you head out again, you pass your neighbour. She waves, lifting a cap that reveals hair as stiff as straw. You nod. There's solidarity in the struggle. Hygiene may be medieval, but the bad hair days are timeless. By mid-morning, you've earned a sheen of sweat across your brow from hauling buckets, feeding animals, or simply existing near a fire. It's the kind of sweat that clings and lingers, not the clean post-gym glow modern people seem so proud of. No, this is the kind of sweat that seeps into your tunic, mixes with dust, and starts building the slow, inevitable argument for a bath. Now comes the question, do you bathe today? You laugh softly, not because it's a joke, but because it's out of the question. Bathing in medieval times isn't as simple as running a faucet. There's no hot water unless you make it yourself by hauling pails from the well, heating it over a fire, and pouring it into a wooden tub that's been patched more times than you care to count. By the time you've done all that, the water's lukewarm, you're exhausted, and someone else in the house already used it. Probably your uncle. Probably after wrestling pigs. Still you eye the tub in the corner. It smells faintly of lard soap ash and regret. Some families share a weekly bath, each person entering in turn youngest to oldest, cleanest to dirtiest, or depending on who argues loudest. By the time it's your turn, the water's more soup than bath. You think twice and opt to wash your hands and feet instead. Historians still argue whether bathing was common or rare across medieval Europe. In some towns, particularly in southern France or parts of Italy, bathhouses were popular and frequently used. In others, especially in colder northern regions, bathing was seasonal at best and superstition at worst. Some even believed that opening your skin's pores through hot water allowed illness to creep in. And yet the public bathhouse does exist. You've heard stories. Steam-filled rooms, big communal tubs, laughter echoing off stone walls. Some even include musicians' food or companionship, depending on how you define that. You're not sure if it's hygiene or recreation, but either way it sounds magical. Of course, you'd have to travel to the next town, pay a small fee and bring your own towel and hope the tub isn't crawling with other people's memories. And lice. But here at home, bathing is more practical. You fill the tub a little, enough to crouch in. You scrub with a cloth made from old linen and a dab of lye soap if you have it. It burns your skin slightly and leaves you smelling like smoked bacon, but it gets the job done. You wash your arms, your feet behind your ears, though no one ever really checks back there, and maybe your hair if it's warm enough. You avoid your face because soap near your eyes feels like punishment, and your reflection in the water says you've had enough punishment today. There's no shampoo, no conditioner, just elbow grease and prayer. If you're lucky, your skin might feel slightly less itchy afterward, but it'll return by evening, especially once you pull on the same woolen clothes you were wearing before the bath. Fun fact, some people used herbs like lavender, mint or rosemary in their bath water. It didn't kill bacteria, but it masked the scent of everything that didn't get scrubbed off. You once tried this throwing in a handful of thyme. You smelled like a soup. Not a bad thing. As you dump the bathwater outside, watching it swirl through a path in the dirt, you feel marginally cleaner. Not clean by modern standards, of course, but medieval clean, which means the fleas have to work a little harder today. You put on your outer tunic still stiff from yesterday's sweat and glance at your hands. Cleaner but not clean. Still a hint of charcoal under one nail and a scratch from that time you wrestled a chicken. You shrug. Bathing, like everything else here, is about balance. Clean enough to be bearable, dirty enough to survive. And that's good enough for now. Later in the day, as the sun rises high and your tunic sticks uncomfortably to your back, a smell wafts into your awareness, familiar, human, and unapologetic. It's not just you, it's everyone. Because in medieval times, body odour isn't just tolerated, it's the wallpaper of life. The air itself is steeped in it. You're starting to smell like you again. Not in the poetic self-discovery way, but in the literal musky cloud that tells your neighbours what you've been up to. And honestly, no one minds. The village smells like animals smoke bread and sweat. You're just another spice in the mix. Deodorant doesn't exist, at least not in the form we know it. There are no scented rollers, no aerosol sprays, just hope herbs and the occasional floral pouch stuffed inside clothing. You tuck a dried lavender sachet under your belt, not for romance, but as a preemptive strike against your own underarms. Historians still argue whether masking scent was a matter of vanity or practical decency. There's evidence that some nobles and wealthier townsfolk went to great lengths to perfume themselves, but for most people, daily body odour was simply part of existing. It was honest. You glance over at your friend Gerard, who's been digging post holes since sunrise. He smells like sour ale and wet wool. You nod in respect. That's a hard-working stench. Some fringe remedies claim that stuffing crushed mint leaves under your arms will sweeten your humours. Others recommend rubbing alum, crystal or vinegar on problem areas, though you're not sure which burns more, vinegar or the judgment of your neighbours. Women sometimes pinned rose petals inside their bodices. Men might tuck sage or marjoram into their hats. You once tried stuffing your socks with rosemary. It helped until it got damp, and then your feet just smelled like meat seasoning. The thing is, most medieval people were used to it. Your nose adapts. You stop noticing the bad and start identifying individual notes like a wine connoisseur of stink. Ah, yes, you think. Barnyard with a hint of garlic and desperation. In fact, being too clean could be suspicious. There are accounts of people being mocked for smelling too nice, as if they were trying too hard or hiding something unholy. Cleanliness might tempt the flesh, and the flesh, well, that's the devil's domain. There's even a belief that your body's natural scent serves a purpose, it's you unfiltered. Medieval physicians categorized body odors by temperament. A melancholic person might smell sour, a choleric one spicy, and a phlegmatic like old porridge. These smells were thought to reflect your soul's balance or imbalance. You catch another waft of yourself and sigh. Maybe you'll visit the herbalist tomorrow. She sells a cream made from pig fat and wildflowers. Doesn't help much, but it makes you feel like you're trying. Then again, your clothes have absorbed your smell, your blanket has absorbed your clothes, and your straw mattress has absorbed everything. Short of setting the cottage on fire, there's no permanent fix. You adjust your tunic, pull your cap lower, and keep moving. Work distracts from the odour. And besides, you smell like everyone else, like work earth, and the kind of effort it takes to get through another day without collapsing. You hear a child yell in the distance, probably playing in the mud again. You smile. They'll come home caked in filth cheeks, flushed hair tangled, and nobody will care. That's just what healthy looks like. As evening nears, you know, your scent will only deepen, layered with smoke from the hearth, grease from dinner, and the soft dust that seems to cling to everything. But for now you carry on. One more step in the great dance of medieval hygiene. The perfume of survival in all its honest funky glory. You're back home just before dusk, and as you strip off your outer tunic carefully since it's stiff with yesterday's sweat, you realise it might be time. Laundry day. You hesitate. Laundry day in medieval times is not like tossing a load into a sleek machine and pressing a button. No cheery beeping noises. No fragrant dryer sheets. No guarantee that you'll come out cleaner than you started. Just a wash tub, a bar of harsh soap, and enough elbow grease to wear through the fabric and your patience. First step, water. You haul it in from the well-sloshing heavy buckets one after another into a wide wooden tub. The bottom of the bucket always seems to contain a bit of mud, a dead bug or something floating that you choose not to investigate. You shrug. It's laundry water, not soup. Then comes the soap or something like it. Maybe you're lucky and have a bit of lye soap made from wood ash and animal fat. It burns your hands, dries out the cloth, and stings like a wasp if it gets into a scratch. But it cuts through grime, mostly. You soak your shirt, dunking it repeatedly in the tub and slapping it against a flat stone. Thwap, thwap. It's less washing and more coercing the dirt to leave. You rub the cloth against itself, trying to work out the sweat stains, food spills, and mysterious crusted patches that might be part cheese. Historians still argue whether medieval laundry was routine or sporadic. Some suggest that lower classes washed their underclothes weekly, if they had underclothes at all, while outer garments were cleaned maybe once per season. Others argue that frequent washing risked weakening the fabric, especially wool, which shrinks and warps like a troubled soul in hot water. What you do know is that laundry's a big deal. It takes hours, sometimes days. Clothes are heavy when wet, and drying them requires either sunlight or space near the fire, both in limited supply. And if the weather turns, you might end up with shirts that smell worse than when you started. Some people use stale urine to bleach linen. It's true. You've heard of the Chamberlain method. Urine was collected, aged, and poured over clothes to remove stains and odours. You've never tried it, but the tanner down the road swears by it. And no one argues with the tanner. Ever. As you scrub your knuckles, go raw, your back aches. You begin to wonder if it wouldn't be easier to just start wearing moss, or go nude. But then you remember your clothes are one of your few defences against the world. Against cold, against sunburn, against fleas, though not very successfully. You rinse the tunic, wring it out by twisting it like a wet rope and hang it near the fire. Not too close or it'll scorch. Not too far or it won't dry before tomorrow. Laundry is a science. A damp, itchy science. Then you tackle your socks, or what passes for socks tubes of fabric that you're pretty sure once belonged to your cousin. The toes are crunchy. You don't want to know why. Fun fact, in some monasteries monks had scheduled laundry days built into their rules. Some even bathed and laundered at the same time, scrubbing themselves and their robes in the same water. Efficiency medieval style. By the time you're done, your hands are pruned, your arms sore, and your mood somewhere between satisfied and existential. You've cleaned one shirt, one pair of socks, and a linen undertunic. That's enough for today. The rest will have to wait for the next holy day, or a heat wave. As you settle into your evening routine, the scent of damp soap still on your skin, you realise that medieval laundry isn't about getting things spotless. It's about trying, about peeling back a few layers of grit and hoping no one notices the rest. And when you lay your head down tonight in the same tunic you just scrubbed, but now slightly less offensive, you'll know the truth in a world without fabric softener. Survival is the scent of lavender sweat and scorched wool. You rise the next morning stretching sore arms from yesterday's laundry adventures and glance at your reflection in the small polished metal disc hanging near your hearth. Your face stares back ruddy, puffy-eyed, with a faint smudge of soot near the jawline. It's time you decide for a bit of skincare. Now don't get excited. There's no shelf full of serums or jade rollers waiting for you. Just a small wooden box filled with whatever odds and ends you've collected or bartered for over the years. Bits of chalk-dried rose petals, animal fat vinegar, and a tiny piece of old mirror polished just enough to make out your nose. You dip your fingers into a pot of thick cream made from goose grease mixed with lavender and maybe crushed almond shells. It smells slightly sour, but that's better than smelling like the inside of your boot. You smear it on your cheeks and forehead, hoping it softens your skin or at least keeps it from cracking in the wind. Historians still argue whether skincare in medieval Europe was widely practiced or reserved mostly for the upper classes, but we do know this people did care about their faces. They just had different priorities. For women, especially among the nobility, the goal was often paleness. A pale face meant you weren't toiling under the sun like the common folk. It meant you were delicate, refined. Possibly dying of anemia, but beautifully so. Some used mixtures of white lead and vinegar to achieve this effect. Yes, lead. The same stuff that poisons you slowly over time. It made the skin glow and then made the skin fall off. Details. Others powdered their faces with ground pearls or chalk mixed with rosewater or egg whites. It caked. It cracked. It sometimes smelled like breakfast, but it worked, sort of. You've heard tales of noblewomen rubbing crushed strawberries on their cheeks to create a healthy flush, or soaking in milk to soften their skin. You, however, have access to neither strawberries nor milk this morning, so you opt for a gentle scrub ashes mixed with a few drops of oil, and hope it doesn't scrape off half your face. Men weren't immune to this ritual either. A lord might use rosewater to cleanse his skin or don a bit of ointment before an important gathering. Soldiers rubbed fat on their skin before battle to keep the cold at bay. Monks wrote recipes for herbal facial washes that doubled as prayers against boils. Your routine is simpler. You rinse your face with tepid water from the hearth kettle, avoiding the bit with floating ash. You wipe with a linen cloth that's seen better days. You rub a salve made from pig fat and rosemary under your eyes. It doesn't help the puffiness, but it makes you smell like a roast, which someone appreciates. Fringe tip of the day, some believe that placing a peeled onion on your cheeks could draw out bad humours. Others thought snails, yes, actual snails could be mashed into a cooling paste for burns or wrinkles. You have no snails, and that's probably for the best. There's also the matter of blemishes. Warts, freckles, spots, they're all viewed with suspicion. Some think they're marks of sin or even signs of witchcraft. Others believe they're the result of bad air or sinful thoughts. Either way, you make a mental note not to mention the weird bump on your chin to anyone, just in case the priest is feeling judgmental this week. And then there's the ultimate fear, pockmarks. The scars left from smallpox, measles, or other childhood plagues. These aren't just cosmetic, they're reminders of survival. Some wear them with pride, others hide them with scarves or head coverings. You pull your hood a little lower just in case. As the fire crackles behind you and a rooster howls no crows outside your door, you finish your ritual. Your skin isn't glowing, it isn't smooth, but it feels less grimy, slightly soothed. And in this world that counts, you slide your hood back up, shielding your freshly smeared cheeks from the morning chill. You step outside and join the other villagers, each of whom has their own secret recipe for staying human-looking in an era determined to grind everyone into dust. And as you walk past the market stalls, you catch a whiff of someone else's perfume, a pouch of clove and mint hanging from their neck. You nod in admiration. Skincare may be medieval, but the art of feeling halfway decent in your own skin, timeless. As you crouch down to pick through a pile of firewood beside your cottage, something moves beneath your tunic. You freeze, a tickle on your ankle, another on your side. You slap instinctively, then again and again. Yep, it's that time again. The itching has returned. A slow, creeping, persistent itch that can only mean one thing: the fleas are back. You step back inside, peel off your outer layers and give your clothes a good shake. Fleas scatter like raindrops, tiny and quick, hopping in every direction with glee. You sigh, watching them vanish into the rush-covered floor. They'll be back. They always come back. Your home is their home. Lice, fleas, bedbugs, and the occasional rat are not intruders in your medieval life. They're roommates. Most households, no matter how clean by period standards, harbour a teeming community of pests. You sleep with them. You eat with them. You scratch them as you walk. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages accepted this as normal or simply resigned themselves to the infestation. There are reports of people delousing themselves in church in bed or in conversation as casually as scratching an itch. Some travellers even carried little lice combs on a string around their necks. One nobleman supposedly trained a servant to inspect his collar each morning, flicking away any unwelcome guests before breakfast. Your own methods are more humble. You take your linen under tunic outside and hang it on a branch in full sun. There's a belief that the heat will drive out lice. You also rub the seams with ashes. Some swear it repels them. Others say vinegar. You once heard someone recommend garlic rubbed into the scalp, but you'd rather smell like a barn than a cauldron. Then there are rats. You try to keep food in sealed wooden boxes or hang it from the rafters in sacks, but rats are clever. They nibble through rope, chew through lids, and occasionally make eye contact in the dark like they own the place. You've named the big one Bertrand. He seems polite. As for your mattress, if it can be called that, it's a sack stuffed with straw, now flattened and fragrant. Pests love it. You've tried adding dried herbs like tansy and wormwood to repel them. It helps, a little. At least it makes it smell like you're trying. And then there's the family dog snoring near the hearth. He scratches constantly, tail thumping rhythmically against the floorboards. He's not much of a guard dog, but he is a highly efficient flea distributor. You scratch your arm and mutter a mild curse. He looks at you unbothered. Fringe fact of the day, some medieval physicians believed fleas were the result of spontaneous generation arising from dust, sweat and heat. Others believed they were punishment for pride or laziness. You wonder which of your sins invited them in, and if confession includes flea bites. It's not just about comfort. Pests carry disease. You've heard whispers about entire towns sickened by fleas. The word plague has started making the rounds again, and people say it travels in the fur of rats and the bellies of bugs. Still, no one seems to know what to do. Burning old straw helps. So does boiling your linens if you have the firewood and patience. You glance at your cloak hanging on a peg. You wore it yesterday and you know it's got passengers. You beat it with a stick, shaking it like it insulted your mother, then let it hang in the wind. It won't solve the problem, but it'll make you feel better, and that's half the battle. Bedtime now requires a ritual. You pat down the blanket, fluff the straw, and pray you're not crawling with things before the rooster even crows. Some nights you succeed, others you dream of itching, and as you lie there picking absent-mindedly at your sleeve, you wonder if this is just the price of medieval life. No pest control, no sprays, no electricity, just sunlight, smoke and stubbornness. But hey, at least Bertrand hasn't climbed into bed with you tonight. Yet. The next day begins as they often do, with a throb in your jaw. It's dull at first, barely noticeable through the morning grogginess, but then it spikes sharp and insistent right through your molars. You wince, press your fingers to your cheek, and know that you've officially crossed into one of the most feared zones of medieval hygiene dental disaster. There's no dentist in your village, no Novocaine, no reclining chair with relaxing harp music. If your tooth hurts, there are only two options: live with the pain, or visit the barber. Yes, the barber. The man who cuts hair, trims beards, and occasionally lops off a limb or two. He has tools, some of them sharp, some of them stained, all of them a little too confident. He'll yank out your tooth with a pair of iron pliers he also uses to remove splinters, and if you're very unlucky, deal with abscesses. You try not to think about how many mouths and other body parts those tools have seen. Historians still argue whether medieval people had more dental issues than we do today. Some suggest their diets low in refined sugar meant fewer cavities. Others point out the lack of toothbrushes, floss, and any consistent cleaning would more than make up the difference. One thing is certain: when teeth went bad, they went really bad. You've tried the common remedies: clove oil rubbed on the gums, holding a warm onion against your cheek, chewing parsley to sweeten your breath and your hopes. There's a salve made of crushed sage and vinegar that supposedly draws out the evil, but in your experience it mostly draws out your will to live. Fun fringe fact: some people believed that worms lived inside aching teeth, tiny creatures gnawing from within. To get rid of them, healers prescribed smoke blown into the mouth, or even spells whispered through a silver ring. You've tried neither, but the temptation grows with each pulse of pain. You remember your neighbour's story. He once let the barber remove a molar with nothing but a gulp of ale and a sturdy stool to grip. Screamed so loud the cows stopped chewing. The tooth came out eventually. So did some blood. He survived, though now he whistles slightly when he talks. For now you opt to avoid the barber. You press a cloth soaked in wine against your face and try to distract yourself. Maybe it'll settle. Maybe it'll get worse. Maybe you'll learn to chew only on the left side of your mouth for the rest of your life. It's not just pain, it's the smell. Without regular cleaning, your mouth can turn into a medieval petri dish. Rotting teeth, infected gums, and the faint scent of last week's mutton stew create an atmosphere not even garlic can cover. You breathe through your nose. Barely. You wonder what noble folk do. Surely with all their coin and court physicians they figured out something better. Turns out, not really. There are records of queens using crushed coral or burned salt to clean their teeth. Some even brush with linen rags and wine. But if a tooth goes bad, it's coming out. Crown or no crown. Some monasteries kept records of dental remedies, usually involving herbs like mint, sage and vinegar. A few even suggested rinsing with honey water, until someone realised that might make things worse. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were. You suspect monks had more time to experiment with mouthwash than you do. You take a break from chores and swish water around your mouth. It doesn't help. In fact, it might have made things worse. You spit into the grass and see a tiny streak of red. You sigh. By evening, the pain has dulled again. It's always like this, a cruel cycle of agony and relief, like your tooth is playing a game of medieval peekaboo. You know it'll be back. You tuck a clove between your cheek and gum, mutter a half prayer to St. Apollonia, patron of toothaches, and try to sleep sitting up so the pressure doesn't build. Because in a world where even soap is optional, your teeth are on their own, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is chew carefully. The next few days bring a chill in the air, a hint of smoke on the breeze, and something else, something you can't quite name, but you know it when you smell its sickness. It drifts through the village like a fog curling under doors, clinging to clothing. And with it comes a very medieval problem: how do you clean the air? It's not just about bad smells, it's about the fear they bring. In medieval minds, bad smells are disease. The theory of miasma, or bad air, dominates most understandings of how illness spreads. If something smells foul, it must carry sickness, and so naturally you start sniffing everything with mild suspicion. Your neighbour's cottage smells of damp wool and spoiled onions. Dangerous. The butcher's stall, sharp iron tang and raw meat. Deadly. Your own home, a mix of smoke, ash, garlic and wet dog. Honestly, who knows anymore? Historians still argue whether miasma theory helped or hurt. On one hand, it led to the use of herbs and smoke to cleanse living spaces, which did offer some antibacterial benefits. On the other hand, it encouraged people to seal themselves indoors during plague outbreaks, closing windows and doors to trap out the bad air, often making things worse. You decide to take action. You open the shutters and wave a linen cloth perfumed with lavender. It flaps dramatically but changes nothing. Then, like many of your neighbours, you prepare your defensa posy, a small bundle of herbs meant to protect your nose and presumably your soul. You gather rosemary, sage, maybe a sprig of thyme if the garden hasn't frozen. Some folks tie the posy to their belts. Others pin it near their face or even stuff it in their noses. There are stories of plague doctors, those ominous figures in bird-like masks filling their beaks with spices and flowers to filter the air. You don't have a mask, but you try holding your posy to your mouth as you walk through the village square. It helps, mostly with your imagination. A fringe tidbit for today during particularly bad outbreaks. People burned rosemary or sulphur inside their homes to chase off the sickness. You've heard of someone hanging a dead weasel in their doorway for protection. You don't ask questions anymore. Everyone's doing what they can. Inside your home, you light a bundle of dried juniper and wave it slowly through the air. The smoke fills the room, choking out the musty dampness. Your eyes water, your throat burns a little, but you tell yourself, it's working. Maybe. Historians still debate if any of this had real health effects or was just medieval aromatherapy. For bedding, you sprinkle dried mint between the straw layers. It's meant to sweeten the sleeper's breath and repel unwholesome spirits. Honestly, if it keeps the fleas away for one night, you'll call it divine. When you pass the local healer's cottage, you see her hanging garlands of garlic and wormwood over her door. She swears it worked last time, though. Last time involved a lot more funerals than usual. Still, she's alive. That counts for something. At the village, well, someone drops a copper coin in and mutters a prayer. Even the most sceptical among you hold your breath when you draw water. If it smells off, you don't drink it, or you boil it, or you pretend it smells fine and pray harder. You return home windows wide open, despite the cold herbs smouldering in a little dish by the fire. The air smells like burnt forest and bruised sage. It's better. Or maybe your nose just gave up. As you sit near the hearthcloth over your nose, you reflect on how cleanliness isn't always about scrubbing skin or washing clothes. Sometimes it's about fighting what you can't see, bad smells, evil airs, death creeping in through the cracks. You may not have disinfectant, you may not have penicillin, but you have rosemary smoke and the stubborn will to survive. And sometimes that's enough. Later that week, you find yourself walking past the abbey, its bell tolling faintly in the distance. The rhythmic chants of monks float across the field like a warm blanket, and for a brief moment you wonder what life smells like inside those high stone walls. The answer might surprise you, because when it comes to medieval hygiene, the monks are cleaner than you think. You wouldn't expect it, what with their rough robes' vow of poverty, and the sheer number of candles they burn. But monastic orders, particularly those following the rule of St. Benedict, often had stricter hygiene routines than the average peasant could dream of. You peer through the gate, spotting a robed figure kneeling beside a basin, washing his hands with calm, methodical purpose. Monks washed before meals. They washed before prayers. Some washed during prayers. And while they didn't scrub every inch of their bodies daily, they did believe that physical cleanliness supported spiritual focus. Historians still argue how widespread these habits were across different orders and locations. Some monasteries had running water aqueducts, even communal latrines that flushed with diverted streams, unthinkable luxury in your village, where indoor plumbing means a bucket behind a curtain. You remember hearing that some abbeys had entire bathhouses, stone rooms heated with hippocausts or fires, where monks could bathe communally, quietly and reverently. No laughing, no splashing, just steam soap and the ever-present hum of Gregorian chants echoing off damp tile. You wouldn't be allowed in, of course. Outsiders aren't welcome in the monks' private quarters, and especially not the baths. But you imagine it warm, quiet and clean. Cleaner than you felt in months. Monks also took care of their clothes. Their habit-simple tunics made of coarse wool were washed regularly, sometimes by lay brothers assigned to laundry duties. You once saw a monk hanging robes near the river, each one perfectly folded like he was tucking in a child. Fringe tidbit of the day, in some monasteries monks weren't allowed to bathe without the abbot's permission. Bathing too often was considered indulgent, maybe even dangerous. So hygiene was regulated, but still taken seriously. And let's talk about hair. Tonsure, the practice of shaving the top of the head, wasn't just a religious symbol. It also helped with lice. Less hair, fewer hiding spots. Monks still combed regularly, often with fine-toothed bone combs dipped in oil or vinegar to kill pests. You've thought about trying it yourself. Then you remember your one attempt to cut your hair with sheep shears and you decide against it. Inside the abbey infirmary, the sick are treated with an odd combination of prayer herbs and surprisingly clean bedding. Linens are boiled, dried in sunlight, and changed more often than your own undertunic. There's a sense of order here, a belief that the body is God's vessel, And while you might not have that luxury, you admire it from afar. You pass the scriptorium where monks are bent over parchment copying texts with fingers stained in ink. Even here cleanliness matters. Quills are wiped, hands are kept dry, and crumbs from bread or cheese are brushed away with care. No one wants mildew in a manuscript. The whole monastery smells faintly of beeswax, dried herbs, and old wood. Not exactly pleasant, but controlled, intentional. You think about your own home where the scent is more a negotiation between sweat smoke and damp straw. The contrast is stark. You sit for a moment outside the stone wall, pretending not to notice the way your cloak clings to your shoulders. It hasn't been washed since the last festival. A monk passes by and nods politely, a bundle of folded linen in his arms. It looks clean, crisp, practically glowing. You wonder just for a second what it would be like to live that life. No fields to till, no chamber pots to empty, just books, prayers, and a scheduled rinse. But then you remember the silence, the early mornings, the endless bells, and the lack of warm mead. Still, you make a mental note to visit the monks more often. If not for divine wisdom, then maybe to borrow a bit of soap. Because while the rest of the world wades through filth, the monastery hums quietly, gently, meticulously, just slightly above the grime. You're sitting near the market square now, trying to enjoy a bit of warm barley porridge, when a group of women pass by, their skirts trailing just above the dirt. One of them, a baker's daughter you vaguely know, is laughing softly, though her face looks drawn and pale. You can't help but glance at her and wonder, how do medieval women manage their hygiene, especially with all the myths swirling around their bodies like a fog no one dares challenge. You've heard plenty. That women are cold and moist by nature, that their humours are harder to balance, that too much washing can weaken the womb. But what does it actually look like to maintain cleanliness as a woman in the Middle Ages? You ask your aunt one evening casually while she's rinsing herbs for dinner. She laughs and hands you a bucket. It's like everything else, she says. You do what you can, and then you pretend it's enough. Let's talk about menstruation, a monthly reality and a monthly mystery. There are no tampons, no pads from the apothecary. What women have is cloth. Linen rags folded and held in place with belts or ties, changed when possible, washed when convenient. Sometimes moss is used, or even wool. Sounds uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. Historians still argue how openly women managed this part of their hygiene. Some church officials considered menstruating women unclean and barred them from religious services. Others wrote nothing at all, as if pretending the whole matter didn't exist. The silence, as they say, is deafening. Then there's bathing, which is even more complicated. A woman's body is considered a site of temptation and suspicion. Bathing too often might signal vanity, or worse, provoke sin. But too little, and the smell invites whispers. Women bathe in private, often at night, using small basins or cloths to wash discreetly. Full immersion is rare unless it's absolutely necessary. One fringe practice involves steam baths made from hot stones placed in shallow pits with herbs like mugwort or yarrow. Women squat over them cloaked in wool, hoping to cleanse or ease cramps. You once peeked through a doorway and saw one in progress. It looked like a pagan ritual, but the women seemed calm, peaceful, clean in a way that didn't need soap. Pregnancy and childbirth bring their own hygiene challenges. Midwives wash their hands, in theory, with wine vinegar or boiled water. Linens are laid out and herbs are burned to cleanse the air. But infections are common, fatal even. There's no concept of sterilization, just prayers, amulets, and experience. A skilled midwife is worth more than gold and sometimes feared just as much. Cosmetics. A mixed blessing. Pale skin is prized, so women apply white lead chalk or crushed pearls to their faces. For rouge, they use cochineal beetroot or even the juice of crushed flowers. The results are inconsistent. Beautiful, maybe. Poisonous, definitely. But for a wedding day or feast, worth it. Or, fringe tip of the day, women sometimes soaked their hands in warm milk mixed with honey to soften them, especially before meeting a suitor. You tried it once. Your hands felt sticky for hours, but you did smell sweet enough to distract the village dog from your ankles. Hair care varies. Most women keep it braided or tied up, covered by veils or wimples. Washing is rare, like for men it requires time, water and privacy. Oils are sometimes used to tame frizz. Lice combs are shared in whispers and passed between friends like secret treasures. And what about expectations? They're high and full of contradictions. You're supposed to smell like roses but never be seen picking them. You should be clean but not too clean. Modest but also radiant. Invisible yet somehow admired. It's a miracle any woman makes it through the day with her sanity intact, let alone her linen spotless. You watch as the women walk past again. One of them scratches her shoulder through a cloak. Another adjusts her headscarf. All of them are managing, maintaining and manoeuvring through a system that barely acknowledges their effort. And yet they endure. They find ways. Quiet rituals, shared remedies, soap wrapped in cloth, a pouch of dried herbs, a moment by the river when no one is watching. Because medieval hygiene isn't just survival. For women it's resilience stitched into their sleeves and whispered between friends. Later that week the parish priest gives a sermon about the soul, how it must be kept pure, washed clean of sin. As you sit in the chilly chapel, shifting uncomfortably on the wooden bench, your thoughts drift is cleanliness of the body, really so different from cleanliness of the soul. In the Middle Ages, the two were more tangled than you might expect. Cleanliness is next to godliness, people say today, but in the medieval world, that idea didn't always hold water. In fact, too much bathing was sometimes seen as suspicious, something worldly, indulgent, even immoral. You glance around the congregation, everyone's bundled up in cloaks and hoods, their faces pale in the candlelight, some noses red with cold. They smell faintly of wool firewood and last night's dinner. It's not unpleasant, just human. And here in the eyes of the church that humanity comes with layers of dirt and sin. Medieval Christian teachings often prioritized spiritual purity over physical. Washing the soul meant confession, penance, prayer, not scrubbing your armpits. Some saints were even praised for their dirtiness. There's a legend about St. Thomas Becket refusing to wash his feet for years. Another tells of a holy woman whose body never decomposed despite the fact that she never bathed. Historians still argue whether the church discouraged hygiene or simply didn't emphasize it. It's true that monasteries kept some standards, but among the laity cleanliness was seen as morally neutral, at best suspicious at worst. Why wash your body when it's your soul that will face judgment? Some believed water itself could be spiritually dangerous. Bathing was said to open the pores, allowing temptation and disease to enter. Women especially were warned that bathing too frequently could inflame lust or vanity. Better to stay dusty and pure. And yet, the church wasn't completely anti-bath. Ritual washing was encouraged. Baptism, of course, was central, a full immersion of the body to symbolize rebirth. Pilgrims washed their hands and feet before entering sacred spaces. Some churches had built-in fountains for this very reason. Cleanliness was acceptable if it had a purpose, a holy one. But don't mistake ritual for routine. Washing because you smell, that's vanity. Washing to prepare for communion, that's virtue. It's a fine line, one you often stumble across with a basin in your hand and a guilty conscience. Fun fringe belief some people thought demons could hide in bathwater. You've heard whispers of a woman who drowned in a tub and was said to have been pulled under by evil spirits. After that, her village drained the bathhouse and filled it with hay. Even your priest has mixed feelings. He preaches moderation, don't stink so much that people flee the pew beside you, but don't scrub so hard you forget your place in the world. Filth might humble you, cleanliness might tempt you. Either way, God sees through the soap. So you do what most people do, you wash when you must, skip when you can, and pray that whatever's clinging to your skin doesn't weigh down your soul. Tonight, as you wash your hands with cool water and a scrap of cloth, you feel a little conflicted. You're not vain. You just don't want to bring yesterday's turnip stew smell to morning mass. You pat yourself dry and whisper a small apology to the saints. Surely they'll understand. And as the bell tolls again in the distance, echoing across the rooftops like a call to both prayer and soap, you pull your cloak tighter and smile. Clean enough for God. Dirty enough for comfort. A week later, something shifts in the air. It starts as whispers, quiet talk near the well, hushed words passed across market stalls. A child's cough. A neighbour who hasn't left their home in days. Then the priest says the word no one wanted to hear, plague. Suddenly the world feels smaller, tighter. Every sneeze is suspicious. Every cough is a curse. And in the middle of all the fear, a strange thing happens, people stop bathing. You've just brought in water for what was supposed to be your monthly wash. The fire crackles. The basin is waiting, but something in you hesitates. Everyone's been talking. The idea that bathing opens the skin, makes the body vulnerable, is gaining momentum fast. In times of plague, people believe that stripping away the layer of sweat and grime you've built up is like opening the door to death himself. Historians still argue whether this fear helped or worsened the spread of illness. Some believe that avoiding water kept people from shivering themselves into fevers. Others think it allowed filth and pests, especially the fleas that carried plague, to thrive. But back then, without microscopes or antibiotics, people trusted their instincts and their fear. Bathhouses close first. Once lively places where people soaked, gossiped and scrubbed, they're now silent, boarded-up stone buildings with herbs nailed to the doors. Too risky. People say the bathwater carries plague, that it's cursed, that it seeps into the skin and poisons from within. You haven't washed your tunic in 2 weeks, you haven't bathed in 3. Your hair is matted beneath your hood, and your hands have a film of grime that doesn't bother you as much as it should. But you tell yourself better dirty than dead. The town healer suggests alternative methods. Smoke your clothes, she says. Walk near fires. Breathe through cloth soaked in vinegar. You try it. You hold a rag near your nose when walking through town, the sharp scent of sour wine stinging your nostrils. It's not pleasant, but it feels like protection. Fringe fact, some people stuffed their ears with cotton soaked in oils to block the bad air. Others drank thick, bitter tonics made from herbs and powdered bone. One man even swore that wearing onions around his neck kept him healthy. He died anyway, but people still wear the onions. You go days without touching water save for drinking. You burn rosemary and sage in your home. You hang wormwood above the door. Your neighbour leaves bundles of dried lavender on windowsills, muttering prayers as she works. Still people get sick. You pass a friend's home and a strip of white cloth hangs on the doorpost. A quiet signal plague inside. You step off the path, giving the house a wide berth, your fingers pressing your herbal rag tighter to your mouth. At night you sleep in the same tunic you wore all day. You no longer change into anything clean. There is nothing clean. You tell yourself your sweat is a shield, your dirt a barrier. You believe it because it's easier than the alternative. And yet part of you remembers what clean felt like. The coolness of water over your back. The softness of skin scrubbed with herbs. The strange foreign idea of comfort. You miss it, but you don't reach for it. Not now, because in times like this, when fear spreads faster than fleas and the streets echo with silence, hygiene isn't about freshness. It's about survival. It's about doing less, not more. And so you wait unwashed, unbothered, but never unworried. You count the days. You track the coughs. You offer prayers instead of soap. And you hope quietly that this time, dirt really does keep death at bay. The village is quieter now. Birdsong carries further. Doors stay shut longer. And you, like everyone else, have begun adjusting to a slower, warier pace. But while the townsfolk shrink into their homes and nobles retreat behind their gates, the pigs keep cleaning the streets. Yes, pigs, or rather piglets turned public sanitation workers. Because in many medieval towns, especially in the more crowded corners of Europe, sanitation didn't come in the form of organised waste removal. It came on 4 legs with a snout, a curly tail, and no sense of culinary discrimination whatsoever. You step carefully along the main road, eyes peeled for the piles of refuse offal and spoiled produce that have become as common as stones. You hold your breath as you pass the tanner's hut where animal skins rot slowly under soaked planks, releasing a smell that could knock a goose unconscious. But waddling through it all, snuffling through the mess like it's a feast the pigs, fat, persistent and disturbingly cheerful. Historians still argue whether this practice was intentional public policy or just an accident of nature and desperation. In some places, pigs were encouraged unofficially to roam freely because they ate what others wouldn't. Table scraps, rotten meat. Even grimly, the occasional corpse during war or plague. They were walking garbage disposals, the original composters. Of course, this came with its own set of problems. You once saw a sow charge a child over a particularly juicy melon rind. Another villager tells of a pig that bit a noble's ankle clean through his boot. Some towns even passed laws trying to keep pigs off certain roads, though enforcement was patchy. Fringe fact of the day in 1386, a pig in France was put on trial for murder. It was dressed in human clothes, brought before a magistrate and sentenced to death. That's how serious and how tangled human-pig relations could get. You sidestep a particularly large hog now rooting through the midden pile behind the butcher's stall. He barely notices you. He's busy. His job is cleaning the village, and he's not unionised. The streets are filled with more than just food waste. Chamber pots are emptied out windows. Garde low, someone might yell, but sometimes not. Urine, dung bones, fish guts, it all ends up on the road. Or in the gutters, or on bad days under your shoes. There's no sewer system, just gravity and time. Which means pigs aren't just helpful, they're essential. They eat the scraps, they stir the waste, they somehow keep it moving. You once heard someone call them the poor man's broom, but still the smell. It lingers, and even though you've grown used to it, there are moments when it hits just right on a warm afternoon near the tanning pits after a long rain, and it stays with you. In your nose, in your clothes, in your soul. The town attempts to help. Straw is scattered over particularly bad patches. Ashes are thrown to soak up wet filth. On feast days, apprentices sweep the main square, but only the square. The alleys remain poetic. You spot a small boy trying to ride a pig. It squeals, turns, and trots off boy clinging to its back. No one stops him. No one even blinks. It's just another scene in the long story of pig-powered public hygiene. You reach your home and kick off your shoes, carefully scraping the soles against the step. You keep a little basin near the door filled with vinegar and mint. You rinse your hands because you know what you just walked through, and the idea of eating with those fingers makes even you pause. Because while medieval hygiene may be primitive, patchy, and often pig-powered, there is still a line you won't cross. And that line smells like old turnips and regret. You wake the next morning to a pale frost clinging to the edges of the window pane, the kind of cold that sneaks through stone walls and curls into your bones. You tug your cloak tighter and peer outside. The fields are brittle, the breath of the livestock steaming in the dawn light. Winter has arrived, and with it comes a very medieval dilemma. How do you stay clean when water is frozen solid? The short answer: you don't, not really. In winter, hygiene becomes a negotiation. Between need and discomfort. Between dignity and survival. You still try, of course. You scrape the ice off the wash basin, rub snow on your face, maybe dab a bit of vinegar under your arms, but your standards drop with the temperature. Historians still argue how often people bathed during winter. In many places it was simply avoided. Heating enough water required firewood, which was precious. Hauling water through slush and snow was exhausting, and taking off your clothes in a freezing cottage, that was a good way to end up sick or worse. You opt for what's called a dry wash. You rub your skin with a coarse cloth or a handful of clean straw. It scrapes off the worst of the sweat, the flakes of skin, and whatever ash or dust has settled in your sleeves. It's not glamorous, but it does the job. Sort of. There's no soap today. You used the last of it on laundry 2 weeks ago. You make do with ashes mixed with a drop of leftover oil. It's gritty, but it leaves your hands feeling slightly less revolting. Hair tied back, covered, forgotten. You wouldn't dare rinse it now your cousin did that last winter, and her hair froze solid before she made it back inside. She still hasn't forgiven herself. Fun fringe solution: some villagers believe rubbing goose fat on the skin insulates against both cold and odour. You tried it once. It worked. You also smelled like a roast, and attracted the neighbour's dog for 3 days. As for clothes, they don't get washed, not unless something truly dire happens. Instead, they're smoked. Hung near the fire overnight to dry stiffen and absorb the smell of burning peat and onion soup. You call it fire fresh. It's better than swamp warm, which was your summer look. And let's not forget feet. Cold feet are dangerous. You keep them wrapped in layers of wool and hope nothing starts growing between your toes. If it does, you'll rub vinegar on it and pray to St. Martin. He's the patron of innkeepers, but you figure he's got time for skin issues too. You visit the village healer for advice. She's wrapped in 6 shawls and refuses to touch the wash basin. Best not disturb your heat, she says. The body keeps the good oils in the winter. Don't strip them. She offers you a salve made of tallow beeswax and dried mint. You smear it on your face and instantly feel like a candle. Even the monks bathe less now. You pass the abbey and catch the faint scent of smoke and wool, not unpleasant, just earthy. The fountains have frozen, and the bathing rooms are locked until spring. But you know they still wash their hands, at least symbolically, before prayers. A rinse with wine, a wipe with warm cloth. Holiness, after all, doesn't hibernate. As night falls and the wind slips through every gap in the cottage walls, you curl up near the hearth, wrapped in layers of scratchy warmth. You haven't bathed in weeks. Your hands are cracked. Your hair is stiff. Your feet smell like sour milk and potatoes. And yet you've survived another day without freezing. And in medieval winter, that's the only kind of clean that matters. It's the feast of St. Bridget today, and the town square is alive with the clatter of carts, the hum of hymns, and the mingling smells of roasted meat, mulled wine, and people. You've layered on your best tunic, cleanish if slightly smoky, and joined the crowd elbow to elbow with neighbours who haven't bathed in as many days as there are saints on the calendar, and yet somehow the nobles smell worse. It's one of those strange truths of medieval life: those with the most money often smell the most elaborate. You pass a group of finely dressed lords and ladies standing stiffly beneath a tapestry awning their silks, fluttering in the breeze. They look magnificent. But as you get closer, a thick wall of perfume sweat and something suspiciously like old cheese hits you in the face like a wooden plank. Historians still argue whether the upper classes truly believed bathing was dangerous, or whether it was simply a matter of fashion and preference. What we know for certain is that during certain centuries, particularly after the Black Death, many nobles began to distrust bathing entirely. Clean pores they believed were open pores. Open pores could absorb disease. So instead of washing, they layered. They wore linen underclothes to soak up sweat, changing them daily sometimes. But the outer garments, cloaks, doublets, embroidered gowns rarely cleaned, spot-wiped at best. And they added perfume, buckets of it. Floral waters, musky oils, bags of dried herbs stitched into sleeves and sewn into hats. You once heard a noblewoman describe her wardrobe as a garden with secrets. You've since decided not to ask what those secrets smelled like. A fringe fact, King Louis XIV of France is said to have taken only a handful of baths in his lifetime, and believed that wiping himself with scented cloths counted as cleansing. The fashion wasn't limited to France. All across Europe, high society flirted with strategic scenting instead of actual washing. You move through the festival past entertainers juggling apples, bakers selling sweetbread and a few too many goats. The air is thick with bodies, and the contrast between social classes is stronger here than anywhere else. You covered in layers, but slightly scrubbed with vinegar, feel almost saintly compared to the velvet-cloaked merchant wafting cinnamon, and something vaguely like mushrooms. You spot a noble child holding a pomander, a small decorative ball filled with cloves, ambergris, and other expensive spices. It dangles from a ribbon, swinging as she skips. Its job to purify the air around her face. You once made your own version with a dried orange stuffed with cloves. It worked briefly until a rat stole it. Back at the food stall, someone spills wine. A noblewoman nearby wrinkles her nose, not at the spill, but at the peasant boy who caused it. His hair is matted, his shirt patched in 6 places, but his hands clean. He probably spent all morning at the stream with ash soap and a rock. Her face, meanwhile, glistens with lead powder, and what smells suspiciously like boiled onions. But social rules are rules. Cleanliness isn't about smell, it's about status. Nobles are assumed clean. Peasants are assumed dirty. The noses lie, but the hierarchy doesn't. Later you hear whispers about a courtier who collapsed from heat stroke, too many layers, too much perfume, not enough ventilation. The apothecary says she found lice in his velvet collar. You don't laugh, but you do tuck that story away for future enjoyment. As the festival winds down and people drift back to their homes, the scent of roasting meat fades, leaving behind the raw aroma of unwashed bodies and trampled straw. You walk home not entirely clean, but not buried under perfume and powdered wigs either. And you realise something strangely comforting in the grand medieval stink-off. It's not always the poorest who reek the most. Sometimes it's the perfumed princes and powdered ladies who leave the heaviest trail. The next morning brings with it a thick mist and the clink of buckets at the river's edge. You're hauling water with 2 others from your hamlet, your boots sinking slightly in the mud with each step. The river looks calm, almost clean. You kneel and scoop some up in your hand, letting the icy stream slip through your fingers. But as your eyes follow the flow upstream, you see it a man emptying a chamber pot into the water, whistling a tune like he's doing the Lord's work. And you remember the river isn't clean. Not really. You've probably drunk from it, bathed in it, maybe even washed your undertunic there during a brief bout of early spring optimism. But this is the Middle Ages, and upstream always matters more than you wish it did. There's a persistent myth in your village, especially among the older folk, that the river cleans itself. That moving water by its very movement becomes pure again. It's a nice idea. Comforting. False. Historians still argue how widely this belief was held, but there's no question in the absence of germ theory water that looked clear was often assumed safe. Never mind what was floating just beneath the surface, or what was drifting down from the pigsty uphill. You fill your buckets anyway. What choice do you have? Wells are scarce, and the ones that exist taste like old tin and dead leaves. Rainwater is fine for washing, but in winter it's unreliable. So you dip and scoop, whispering a small prayer to St. Florian, patron of floods and clean water. Back home you strain the river water through a cloth. It catches the worst of the mud and debris. Then you boil it. Or at least you try. Boiling takes time, firewood, and a lot of patience. You'd rather save the good fuel for soup. And here's the irony, even knowing the river is dirty doesn't always change your habits. That's life in the medieval world, doing your best with what you've got, even when what you've got might give you dysentery. Fringe tip of the day, some villagers put silver coins in their water jugs. The belief is that silver cleans the water, kills whatever's inside. There might even be some truth to it though, mostly it just makes you feel fancy. You remember the healer's advice, if it smells like eggs don't drink it. Good rule, if only it were always that obvious. Laundry day. The river's your only option. The banks are worn smooth from generations of scrubbing. You join the others with soap rags and hope. You pound your tunic against a rock. It looks cleaner. It feels cleaner. That'll have to be enough. Bathing risky. Some folks strip and wade in when it's warm enough, kids mostly who don't mind the leeches or the goose droppings. Adults are more cautious. They've seen what happens when someone gets sick after a dip. Even if they don't blame the river directly, they remember. You sit by the bank for a moment, letting the cold water run through your fingers. A fish darts past. A slipper half rotten bobs downstream. You imagine it came from the abbey, or maybe from someone upstream who's now walking with a limp and a grudge. And still the river moves. It doesn't stop. It doesn't judge. It just carries the stories and the waste of everyone who lives along its banks. Back home, you pour a cup of the now settled water, sniff it cautiously, then take a sip. It tastes fine. Mostly. Earthy. Metallic. With a faint hint of regret. You tell yourself it's moving water. That has to count for something. The sun's setting low and golden across the village rooftops when you hear it. Laughter echoing from the alehouse, the clatter of wooden mugs and the sound of splashing water. Curiosity piqued you edge closer, and there, in a shaded alcove behind the tavern, you witness something entirely absurd and entirely real. Someone bathing in ale. Not a lot, mind you. Just enough warm, frothy leftovers from the bottom of barrels mixed with herbs and a bit of hot water. The man soaking in it is red-faced, shirtless, and smiling as if he's rediscovered the lost city of Rome. You watch in awe. You've heard of this, of course. You just didn't believe people actually did it. Historians still argue whether beer and wine baths were widespread indulgences or rare exaggerated eccentricities. But the records are there, nobles soaking in spiced wine, merchants soaking in stale ale, all believing that the properties of alcohol, whether for warming the blood, softening the skin, or driving out evil humours, could cleanse the body as well as the soul. You're not about to jump into a tub of tavern runoff, but you can't help but marvel at the creativity. When soap is scarce and water carries risk, people turn to what they do. Have mead ale, wine broth, milk, even vinegar. Yes, people have bathed in broth. Not the chunky kind, more like an herbal infusion. Warmed and poured over the body, usually with a cloth. Some recipes include mint sage or fennel. The idea is to open the pores, relax the muscles, and add a bit of scent to mask whatever's been fermenting beneath your tunic. You once met a woman who swore by a milk bath once a month. Goat's milk boiled with lavender and cooled just enough not to scald. She had soft hands, smelled faintly of pudding, but she was also shunned by the local priest for her Roman vanity. Some say she moved to a bigger town. Others say she was excommunicated. You choose to believe she started a spa. Fringe tidbit of the day in medieval medicine, warm wine compresses were used to clean wounds. Someone somewhere likely made the leap: if it's good for a cut, it must be good for the whole body. Questionable logic, but undeniably ambitious. You step inside the alehouse to escape the chill. The smell of yeast sweat and smoked meat wraps around you like a heavy cloak. But in one corner a woman is soaking her feet in a wooden bucket. The liquid is dark. Possibly wine. Possibly not. She smiles at you and says, "Kills the itch," warms the toes. You nod and pretend you haven't just learned something both revolutionary and mildly alarming. Later that night, you can't stop thinking about it. All the things people have used to stay clean or feel clean anyway, in a world where water isn't always safe and soap is as valuable as silver. Beer, wine, broth, milk, even warmed cider if someone's feeling festive. It's not hygiene in the way a scholar would write it, but it works. Or at least it gives people the illusion of control, of ritual, of caring for themselves when the world so often doesn't. Back at home you look at the small jug of vinegar on your shelf and wonder. You warm a bit over the fire soaker cloth and wipe down your arms and face. The scent stings your nose, your skin prickles, but afterward you feel clean. Not fresh, not sterile, but cleaner than before. And in the world you live in, that counts for more than anyone admits. The morning sun filters in through a crack in your shutter, illuminating the thick blanket of straw covering your bed. You groan, stretch, and immediately scratch your neck, then your elbow, then both ankles. It's not imagination. It's another day in the medieval sleeping arrangement lottery, and hygiene isn't just what's on your skin, it's what's under it. Your bed is not a soft cloud of linen and feather. It's a sack filled with straw, possibly moss, and definitely things that aren't just bedding. You shake out your tunic, dreading the tiny scuttling sounds you sometimes hear when the room is quiet. Welcome to Hygiene at Bedtime. Most nights you crawl into bed wearing the same clothes you wore all day because undressing is a luxury for those with consistent heating and no fear of waking to a rat on the blanket. You keep your boots by the hearth sometimes with herbs tucked inside to discourage spirits, and your cloak doubled up for warmth and extra layering. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages thought of bedtime hygiene the way we do today. Did they wash up before sleep? Maybe. Monks sometimes rinsed hands and faces. Nobles occasionally wiped down with scented cloths. But for the average person, sleep hygiene meant not dying of cold or fleas. Your straw mattress is generously due for replacement. But straw's not free and it doesn't last long. Over time it compresses into a kind of flat, prickly mat that smells faintly of earth and sweat. You once heard someone say, "If your straw's not crawling, it's not lived in." They meant it as comfort. It didn't work. Fringe tip of the day, some households blend dried herbs into the straw lavender mint wormwood tansy. It doesn't kill the lice, but it masks the scent. You added rosemary last week. Now you itch and smell like roast meat. Your blanket is wool rough and unwashed but precious. You share it with a sibling, or a spouse, or the dog if he gets there first. You've tried shaking it out, brushing it off, even airing it near the fire, but there's a distinct crackle to it now, and maybe a few crumbs. Some folks line their beds with sheets, but that's a luxury. Linen must be washed, and washing takes effort. You've heard of families with summer sheets and winter sheets. You have year-round tunic. You toss in the night not because of dreams, but because of guests, the fleas and lice you definitely didn't invite. You've combed, you've smoked, you even left a bowl of vinegar under the bed hoping it might trap a few. It didn't. They laugh at vinegar. Still there are comforts. A warm hearth, a roof that doesn't leak much, a pillow that isn't just a folded tunic. Tonight you'll boil your nightshirt, or at least rinse it in hot water, then let it freeze stiff on the line before bringing it in. That might kill a few bugs, or give you a new cold. There's also superstition. Some people hang charms above the bed to ward off nightmares or bed demons. Others sprinkle salt under the mattress. You tried both. You still had nightmares. One featured a talking flea. And then there's the smell. After a while you stop noticing it. The layers of wool, sweat, dried herbs, smoke and damp straw merge into something oddly soothing. Familiar. Like the scent of family. If your family lived in a barn. But even as you scratch and shift and pull the blanket higher, you find yourself grateful. You have a bed. You have a corner to sleep in, a roof overhead, and if you're lucky, a few dreamless hours before the rooster and the chamber pot call you back to reality. Medieval bedtime hygiene may not sparkle, but it keeps you human, even if it also keeps you itchy. The rooster's cry wakes you before dawn, as always. You swing your legs off the mattress, brushing away a few pieces of straw stuck to your tunic, and stretch with a creak in your back that no amount of vinegar rubs will fix. As your feet hit the cold earth floor, your mind shifts to one of life's daily inevitabilities, where to relieve yourself. Because in medieval times, the toilet isn't down the hall. It isn't even inside. It's wherever decency, convenience and gravity agree to meet. Your own setup is modest. A clay chamber pot tucked in a wooden frame beside the hearth, usually covered with a cloth more for dignity than odour control. It's used overnight, especially during rain or snow. Come morning, someone often takes it out and empties it in the midden or in the alley behind the pigs. Historians still argue whether sanitation was primitive or pragmatic. The truth, it was both. The wealthy had garderobes, stone latrines built into the castle wall, with a chute that emptied into the moat or down a sheer drop. Some even lined their walls with herbs to ward off the smell. The poor they squatted wherever privacy allowed, behind hedges in fields or over a plank above a pit. In town you might use a communal privy, a wooden seat over a shared trench. These are often dark, spider-filled and occasionally terrifying, but they beat the alternative, especially in crowded streets where people once dumped waste out their windows, with a yell of "Guarders low, look out for the water." Though let's be honest, sometimes they didn't even yell. Fringe tidbit of the day, some wealthier households kept pots of crushed herbs or flowers by their toilet seats, not for hygiene, but to bury their noses in while doing their business. You've considered trying it with rosemary, but you know your dog would probably eat it. You step outside into the biting morning air and walk to the far edge of the garden. You've got a favourite spot behind a tree near the compost heap. You've marked it with flat stones. Not because you're fancy, but because you once stepped into someone else's business and swore it would never happen again. Wiping, of course, is a matter of geography and season. Cloth rags are reused, washed occasionally. In the warmer months, moss is popular. In wealthier homes, bits of wool. In cities there's always straw if you're brave. You once tried a corn husk. You don't talk about it. Public sanitation. A mixed bag. Some towns employ gong farmers' men whose job it is to dig out and cart away waste from cesspits and latrines. They work at night, they smell like despair, and they earn decent wages because no one else wants the job. You've met one. He carried a special curved shovel and a blank stare. Children. They go wherever. Behind the oven, in the yard, occasionally on the dog. No one bats an eye. You once saw a toddler squat mid-market. The fishmonger just sighed and rinsed the cobblestones with vinegar. You've heard that in ancient Rome they used shared sponges on sticks rinsed in vinegar between users. You try not to imagine what medieval folks might have borrowed from that idea. Your own routine is simple morning walk, find your spot, dig with a stick, if the ground's soft enough. You cover what needs covering, wash your hands in a bucket by the door and carry on. Soap rare. You make do with ashes or sand, maybe a splash of cold water from the well. Your hands are always dry, always chapped, but mostly they're yours. You return inside, nose red, toes numb, and pour a cup of warm ale. It tastes earthy. But after the morning you've had, it goes down like holy water. Because in medieval times, hygiene isn't glamorous. It's not scented, it's not sparkly. But it works, mostly. You've just sat down with your breakfast, a slab of rye bread that could double as a roofing tile, and a lump of cheese old enough to have opinions when a visitor arrives. The village messenger, red-faced and panting, hands you a note sealed with wax. It's not from the Lord, not from the priest. It's from your cousin recently returned from the city. You swallow a mouthful of bread and a little pride already bracing for what's coming. Because while you might still bathe once a month, he's now seen urban hygiene and he's never going to let you forget it. Cities in the medieval sense are a strange paradox. You expect refinement, sophistication, the hum of clean order. What you get is people filth, and occasionally a man emptying a bucket from the second story. Your cousin describes streets crammed with market stalls, children, horses, dogs, and smells layered so densely you can taste them. There's perfume from apothecaries, spice from foreign goods, and human waste wafting from the gutters. Historians still argue whether medieval cities were cleaner or dirtier than the countryside. The truth lies in scale. In a village, your chamber pot may offend a goat. In a city, it may roll downhill into a cathedral. Some cities, particularly under Roman influence, had rudimentary sewer systems, or at least paved roads with drainage ditches. Others relied on open trenches along the sides of streets, gutters of filth, that when it rained turned into raging rivers of regret. Your cousin mentions that in Paris some streets are cleansed by throwing straw on them to soak up waste. In London, regulations exist about where to dump refuse, but no one enforces them unless it affects the guilds or the King's wine route. Then there's the noise. Urban hygiene is auditory too, the echo of hooves, the splash of something you hope is water, and the ever-present hawking of cellars with mouths never cleaned by a toothbrush. You picture your cousin arriving at an inn and being handed a small damp towel and a bowl of cold water. A Bath City style. If he's lucky, it's changed between guests. If not, well, vinegar solves many problems, or so they say. Fringe fact of the day, some city folk believe hanging live eels in drinking water keeps it pure. You don't ask how. You don't want to know. Public bathhouses are more common in cities, but they come with risk, both social and health-related. They're noisy, steamy, and shared. They're also suspected of spreading disease, promoting vice, and occasionally serving as not-so-secret brothels. In many places the church condemns them, but they're always full. People want to feel clean, even if it means bathing beside someone named Odo the Greasy. Your cousin writes of seeing a public latrine built over a river with holes in the wood planks and a rope to hang on to while you commune with nature. Elegant it is not. Efficient it definitely is. Still, cities offer access to hygiene goods you can only dream of. Soap from Marseille, linen from Flanders, comb sets made from horn and decorated with silver, herbal oils for skin and hair sold by a woman who may also read fortunes. The lines blur. You smile at his closing note, I smell better, but I miss the quiet. And I think I stepped in 5 different kinds of dung. Because that's the truth of it, isn't it? Medieval cities might have more baths, more perfumes, more herbalists. But they also have more feet, more mouths, more animals, more mess. You fold the note and tuck it into the thatch above your hearth, beside the dried rosemary bundle. Then you take a long sniff of your armpit. Not great, not terrible, and certainly no worse than Odo. So while your cousin may strut through cobbled streets in oiled boots and lavender cologne, you still have something he doesn't room to breathe space to scrub in peace, and no eel in your water bucket. And that for today is more than enough. Later that afternoon, while tending to your garden and trying not to think about your cousin's perfumed city adventures, you hear the telltale creak of cartwheels and a familiar jangle of bells. It's the peddler rolling in from a distant village with trinkets. Gossip, and most exciting of all, hygiene goods you'll never afford but always admire. You wipe your hands on your tunic and wander toward the cluster of curious villagers gathering around his cart. It's a battered wooden thing crammed with soaps wrapped in waxed cloth bone combs, tiny vials of scented oil, and bundles of dried herbs tied with string. It's the closest thing to a medieval pharmacy, and for a few coppers you could walk away smelling like a very clean bishop. The peddler lifts a cake of soap-brown square, smelling of ash, and something herbal, and declares it's made with goat-fat wood ash and marjoram, and that it leaves the hands clean and the soul closer to heaven. You snort. You've made your own soap before. It mostly worked. It also burned your skin and turned your nails black for 3 days. Still, you pick it up, sniff it, and imagine a life where soap isn't something you ration like gold dust. You imagine having enough to use twice a week, not just on feast days or after plague rumours. Historians still argue how accessible hygiene goods really were in the countryside. Some villages had a local soap maker, others relied entirely on travelling vendors like this one. For most people, soap was rare, cherished and homemade. Buying it was a luxury reserved for weddings, funerals, or impressing a potential spouse with your shockingly clean fingernails. You glance over at the bone combs. One is finely carved with notched teeth thin enough to drag lice from a saint. You own a comb, of course chunky and worn, passed down from your grandmother. It's more club than grooming tool, but this is the sort of comb that ends up in a dowry chest. Fringe tidbit of the day, some noble women carried small perfume flasks or comb cases made of ivory. Not for daily use, but to flash around as symbols of refinement and cleanliness, much like the peddler's claim that this vial of rose oil was once used by a duchess from Bruges. You don't believe him, but the oil does smell nice. Next come the herbs, tied in bundles labelled with chalk lavender for scent, sage for skin, rue for lice. He even has dragon's blood resin which he claims keeps the fleas away and pleases the fairies. A girl beside you buys it for her doll. You buy a small bag of crushed bay leaves. They don't work against lice, but they do smell like something you'd find in a saint's coffin. He also offers Powder's tooth powder made from crushed salt and dried mint. Use with a damp cloth or clean finger, he says, will freshen your mouth and attract admirers. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Not the right admirers maybe, but admirers nonetheless. There's even a primitive version of deodorant, a lump of wax mixed with dried herbs and lard. You've tried it before. It melts in summer, hardens in winter, and always smells faintly of soup. Still, it's something. You remember your aunt once dabbing crushed thyme behind her ears before a feast. It lasted until the dancing started. And finally, the miracle cure universal hygiene tonic, a cloudy liquid in a stoppered glass vial. 1 drop under the tongue every morning, he says, and you'll smell of roses all day. You lean closer. It smells like vinegar and horseradish. You buy a single drop. You regret it immediately. By the end of the hour, the peddler packs up and rolls out bells jingling. You return home with your bay leaves, a tiny soap scrap, and a slightly better sense of how the other half cleans. You drop the soap into a cloth pouch and tie it with string. You'll use it next month, maybe on your birthday, because hygiene in the Middle Ages isn't about staying spotless. It's about making do, savouring the little luxuries, a new comb, a clean face, a day without lice, or at least a day where you pretend you don't have any. You wash your hands that night with cold water and a smile. You may not be a duchess, but today you smell faintly of bay and rose, and that's a win. The next morning, as you kneel by the hearth blowing gently on last night's embers, you're struck by a sharp, unpleasant scent rising from your cloak, a mix of sweat smoke and perhaps cabbage. You try not to overthink it. Still, it's time for a fix. Not a bath, you don't have enough water or motivation for that, but the next best thing, smoke washing. Yes, in a world without reliable soap or regular baths, medieval people turned to fire not just for warmth or cooking, but for cleansing. You throw on your boots, pick up your cloak, and make your way to the small wooden shed you call a kitchen, dragging behind you a bundle of herbs and a stick for prodding coals. Smoke in your world is more than air pollution. It's a tool, a treatment, an old trick passed down from your grandfather's grandfather, who claimed it could burn away the stink without boiling your bones. You suspect he meant it metaphorically, mostly. Historians still debate how common this practice was across regions. Some records suggest it was a peasant solution, cheap, simple, and mildly effective. Others argue it bordered on ritual used especially in colder months or when illness was in the air. You hang your cloak near the hearth on a wooden peg, not too close it should warm, not catch fire. You toss in a bundle of dried rosemary and sage. The smoke curls upward, filling the room with a scent that's equal parts soothing and sharp. You turn the cloak every few minutes, letting the smoke soak in. It doesn't kill fleas, it doesn't lift stains, but it does something else it neutralises. The scent of herbs replaces that human musk you've been carting around for the better part of a fortnight. You catch yourself breathing deeper, not proud exactly, but less embarrassed. Next, your undertunic. It's stiffer than a soldier's shield and smells like damp linen and frustration. You hold it above the fire, swinging it slightly like you're airing out your sins. A few sparks catch the hem. You stamp them out with practiced ease. Fringe fact of the day, some folks believe smoke actually heals cloth, restoring its strength and spiritual purity. You're not sure about that, but you do know that clothes aired in smoke last longer than ones boiled every month. Or perhaps, more honestly, ones left to rot in a pile under the bed. You once saw a nobleman's laundry hung in a smokehouse, shirts, doublet stockings left to dangle beside strings of garlic and cuts of ham. Apparently they smelled like smoked meat for a week. You considered trying it. You lacked both a smokehouse and the nobleman's budget for ham. As your clothes take on their new scent, you sit beside the hearth, letting the smoke roll over your skin and into your hair. You imagine it crawling into your pores, evicting the days-old grime, soothing the scratches left by straw and bugs and too much scrubbing. There's something almost spiritual about it. You've never visited a proper bathhouse, never soaked in hot water for longer than a few minutes, but here in this smoky little room, wrapped in herb-scented air, you feel clean adjacent. Some monks you've heard do the same. They burn incense in their cloisters, swinging it from brass censers. It purifies the soul, they say. Perhaps the body too. Perhaps there's no real difference. You finish the ritual by rubbing a handful of dry mint over your hands and into your scalp. It tingles. You sneeze. The dog gives you a strange look. By the time you dress again, your cloak is softer, warmer, and noticeably less cabbage-like. Your tunic crackles faintly but smells of rosemary. Your skin carries just the faintest trace of ash. And best of all, you feel better. Not cleaner in the modern sense, but lighter, calmer, like you've shaken off a layer of the week. Because sometimes, in a world without hot showers, all you need is fire, a few good herbs, and time. That evening, the sun sets behind a curtain of low clouds, and a damp chill seeps into your bones. You toss another log onto the fire and lean back, fingers raw from a day of hauling grain sacks. Your body aches in places you didn't even know could ache, and your thoughts turn to something you rarely have the luxury to consider: getting sick. Not from overwork or hunger, though those help, but from something deeper, darker, and most terrifying of all: unclean air. When illness strikes in the Middle Ages, cleanliness becomes part superstition, part hope, and part frantic improvisation. There's no germ theory, no real understanding of viruses or bacteria. Instead, disease is believed to float in on invisible winds, carried by miasma, foul, corrupted air that slithers through streets, windows, and lungs. Your aunt lights a bundle of dried rosemary and lets it smoulder in a clay bowl. You follow her lead, waving the smoke around like it's holy water. You burn sage near the door, tuck garlic into the windowsill, and even rub a bit of vinegar on your hands just in case. It doesn't smell great, but it smells intentional. Historians still argue how effective these rituals were, or whether they were more psychological comfort than practical defense. But they were everywhere. From peasants to kings, people tried to fight smell with smell, believing that pleasant odours could chase out disease. You've heard of plague doctors, of course, men in long black robes, leather gloves, and those famously beaked masks stuffed with herbs, spices, and dried flowers. It's said they carried canes to prod the sick without touching them. You've never seen one in person. You hope you never do. If a beaked man enters your village, it means someone's dying. Fringe fact of the day, one of the most popular cures during outbreaks was the Four Thieves vinegar, a blend of garlic, herbs, and vinegar that supposedly protected a band of thieves from infection as they looted plague victims. You've tried recreating it. It smells like salad dressing and regret. Inside your cottage, the air grows heavy with smoke and herb. You crack the door open to let in some fresh air, then immediately regret it. The wind carries the scent of manure, damp straw, and something else. Something wrong. You shut the door again. Better the rosemary. The town healer recommends a daily tonic wine boiled with sage and cloves. You choke it down like medicine. It burns. It also makes your nose run, which you take as a sign it's clearing the humours. And then there are the clothes. You change your tunic for one that's been smoked, then rub your wrist with a bit of mint oil. You stuff your boots with dried lavender. Will it work? You don't know. But it helps you sleep without imagining death sniffing at your toes. Even your bedding gets attention. You toss herbs beneath the straw wormwood and rue said to repel invisible corruption. You once heard of a man who lined his mattress with dried orange peel. You'd try it if you ever saw an orange. As you settle in for the night, the fire snapping softly and the air pungent with sage and vinegar, you feel a strange peace. Not safety, never that, but a kind of readiness. You've done what you can. Because in the medieval world, when medicine fails and priests run out of prayers, hygiene becomes faith. Every herb hung above the door, every drop of wine-laced tonic, every ritual wiping of hands, it's all a way of saying, I choose to live, even in a world that doesn't make it easy. And as you close your eyes, you breathe in the bitter, smoky air and whisper your own quiet charm. The next morning, the whole village is abuzz. A crier rides in from the next town over, shouting something that sends ripples through the market square. The Black Plague is spreading again. You stop in your tracks. People freeze mid-step. A merchant drops his apple basket. And just like that, your small corner of the world tips back into fear, and with it comes a wave of old beliefs, half-remembered rituals, and a very sudden change in how people treat bathing. Which is to say, they stop immediately. There's a deep, widespread belief now that clean skin kills. That opening your pores through heat and water creates tiny invisible doors through which death itself might creep in, riding on the back of some bad-smelling breeze. Historians still argue whether the avoidance of bathing during plague times made things worse, or was simply a reflection of deeper medical misunderstanding. What's certain is that fear changes everything. The bathhouse door is chained shut by evening. Buckets of rose water that once splashed on noble cheeks are tucked away. Herbal steam rooms fall silent. Even those who could afford warm baths now opt instead to gently wipe themselves with vinegar-soaked cloths. No water, no scrubbing, no heat. You overhear the blacksmith mutter to his apprentice, "Don't wash your hands too hard. You'll let the poison in." You once might have scoffed. But now as the wind picks up and the crows circle lower than usual, you find yourself agreeing with him. You retreat to your home, layering on your filth like armour. Even the monks at the abbey close their bathing room. They gather instead to burn incense chant in low Latin voices and sprinkle blessed water at the doors. Not enough to dampen, just enough to sanctify. You hang bundles of garlic over your threshold. You chew dried juniper berries one each morning. You carry a small pouch of salt in your cloak pocket and touch it whenever someone coughs nearby. Fringe tidbit of the day, there were actual medical advisories circulated in cities like Florence and London, warning against bathing during outbreaks. They said clean skin was vulnerable. That dirty, oily skin sealed the body's humours and acted as a natural barrier. You repeat this aloud to yourself like a prayer. And yet paradoxically, smell still matters. People start carrying pomanders, small balls filled with herbs and resins tied around their necks or wrists. You see women wearing garlands of thyme. Men sprinkle rosemary onto hot stones to inhale the vapour. A carpenter down the lane begins wearing a cloth mask soaked in clove water. It doesn't look comforting, but it smells divine. You wash nothing, not your clothes, not your body. You air your tunic near the hearth, smoke it with burning rosemary, and call it good enough. Your skin itches. Your scalp is a battlefield. But you'll take itchy over infected. Your cousin in the city writes again. People are dying in the streets, he says. We don't dare draw water unless we boil it 3 times and pray after. You wonder if that works. You try it that night. The village healer prepares plague bags, bundles of cloth filled with sage rue, mint and garlic meant to be pinned inside clothing. She runs out of mint by noon. You manage to trade a handful of dried thyme for one of the last bundles. It smells like a roast chicken, but you feel safer with it on. And through it all, no one bathes. Not the butcher, not the priest, not the nobleman who usually smells of rose water and now smells like roasted onions and panic. Not even you. Because even though part of you knows it's superstition, you can't ignore the logic of fear. You saw a neighbour wash his feet last week. Today he's coughing behind closed shutters. So tonight you sit by the fire, skin grimy clothes, stiff with wear but pores tightly closed. You whisper another prayer. You toss more rosemary into the fire. And you tell yourself, just like everyone else does now, better dirty than dead. A few days later, under a pale grey sky, you find yourself walking along the edge of the village, far from the hearth. Smoke and nervous whispers. You pass a boarded-up cottage, one of many marked by a white cross daubed on the door with chalk. There's no movement inside, no sounds. Just the faint rustle of wind and something far more unsettling silence. And then from around the bend he appears. Long black robe, wide-brimmed hat, gloves like a butcher's, and a beaked mask, long, curved, stuffed with herbs and soaked linen. A plague doctor moving slowly through the dirt like a shadow with a satchel. You stop dead in your tracks. You've heard about them, read about them, laughed about the masks over bread with friends who now lie sick behind shuttered windows. But now one is here in the flesh, and he smells like a garden on fire. The mask shaped like a bird's beak is packed with strong-smelling herbs, rose petals, mint camphor cloves, myrrh, lavender, even vinegar-soaked sponges. The idea is simple. If disease travels through bad air, then bury your face in good air. Better yet, keep your face inside good air at all times. Historians still argue how effective this really was. Most agree the mask provided some protection, if only from direct splashes or flea bites. Others say it was just for the doctor's own comfort, a way to face plague without facing its scent. You wonder what's worse, the smell of death or the scent of someone trying to outsmart it. He moves carefully, deliberately, never hurrying, every motion calculated. In one gloved hand he carries a long stick, not for walking but for prodding. Patients, corpses, anything he doesn't want to touch. You've heard he also uses it to lift clothing check pulses or fend off the desperate. And here's the thing, the plague doctor isn't just a physician. He's part healer, part bureaucrat, part witness. He records the names of the dead, writes prescriptions no one can fill, draws chalk marks on doors and tells families to stay inside. You nod respectfully as he passes. He says nothing, just tilts his head slightly in acknowledgement. You swear the mask looks disappointed. You remember tales of earlier plague doctors, some paid by cities, others by churches, a few simply wandering volunteers with a penchant for drama and an immune system made of iron. Their treatments, bleeding, vinegar, rinses, crushed emeralds, boiled frogs, powdered unicorn horn, none of which worked. But people paid for it anyway, because something was better than nothing. Fringe tidbit of the day in Venice, plague doctors were required to live apart from others, often in isolated homes or ships moored in harbour. They weren't allowed to socialise. Some weren't even allowed to speak outside official duties. In essence, they were quarantined too. Back in the village, people peek from their windows as the figure glides past. A child cries. A door creaks shut. No one follows. No one dares. His mere presence says more than a dozen sermons the sickness is here. You see him kneel by a sickbed window and slide something inside a vial, perhaps, or a dried herb. You see him take notes, then move on. You remain still watching until he vanishes over the hill, that strange silhouette burned into your memory. That night you sit beside the fire with your cloak pulled tight and your head bowed. You mix wine with crushed sage and sip it slowly, eyes on the flames. You imagine what it's like inside that mask, humid, floral, suffocating. Protective. A mobile monastery of scent. And you wonder for just a moment if you'll ever smell lavender again without thinking of death. The next morning the air feels different, heavier. You wake before the rooster crows, not from noise, but from an itch. A crawling, buzzing sensation at the edge of your scalp that sends you scrambling for the firelight. You light a stub of tallow and hold it close to your head, peering into a cracked piece of polished metal. Lice, again. You knew this day would come. It's not your first infestation, and it won't be your last. In the medieval world, lice aren't a shameful secret, they're a fact of life. Everyone has them. Even nobles scratch under their wigs. The real question isn't whether you have lice, but how many. You reach for your bone comb, the one you smoked last week and blessed with thyme. It catches in your hair instantly. The teeth drag through like claws through straw, tugging, snapping, dragging tiny white specks out one at a time. Historians still argue whether lice were considered pests or merely passengers. Some records show people tolerating them, picking them off casually during conversation. Others, like you see them as an itchy menace that turns sleep into a battlefield. You know the drill. You heat a metal pin and tap it gently on your scalp, hoping to scare the lice away from their favourite hiding places. You sprinkle crushed rosemary over your shoulders, like some desperate anti-bug priest. Then, for good measure, you set your hooded cloak outside in the cold overnight. Lice don't like the chill, you unfortunately do. There's talk in the village of lice powders made from crushed herbs, powdered clay, and sometimes ashes. You tried one last year. It worked, but you coughed up rosemary dust for a week and had to explain the grey streaks on your face to the baker's daughter. Fringe tidbit of the day, some medieval folks believed that lice were sweat-borne, that they spontaneously generated from filth and heat. Others thought they were a punishment for vanity. You think they're just opportunists with too many legs and no manners. Today the healer offers a lice-cleansing potion, vinegar, onion skin, a touch of brine, all simmered in goat's milk. She swears by it. You take a ladleful and dab it behind your ears. The smell lingers for hours. No lice approach, but neither does anyone else. Then comes the boiling your tunic, your bedsheet, your cap, into a cauldron with lye soap stirred with a stick long enough to keep your hands from blistering. You boil the lice out, or at least boil them very, very sorry. And still you itch. Because lice aren't just in your clothes, they're in your bed, your straw mat, the seams of your sleeves. They're a part of you now. Not welcome, but persistent. A reminder that even when you clean, you're never truly alone. You scratch, then stop. The scratching never helps. You pick a few by hand, flick them into the fire, and whisper something that sounds suspiciously like a curse. Your mother used to say lice were cleverer than monks and twice as stubborn. She once tried shaving your head, rubbing your scalp with vinegar, and covering it in goose fat to smother the last survivors. It worked. It also gave you the nickname Slippery Skull for 2 summers. Tonight you sleep wrapped in a clean, if slightly crispy tunic. Your head rests on straw dusted with lavender. You scratch once, then twice, then sigh. Because in the world you live in clean is a battle, not a state of being. You fight lice the same way you fight plague dirt or bad smells with fire herbs, vinegar, and sheer indignation. And though you never truly win, you survive. By the end of the week, the village feels quieter. Not safer, never that, but slower. The last of the peddlers have moved on. The plague doctor hasn't returned. And though the illness still lingers like smoke in the corners, people begin to settle back into the rhythms of survival. You're one of them. This morning you find yourself standing beside the village, well waiting your turn behind a neighbour who's boiling her bucket before she drinks it. Not because it helps the taste, it doesn't, but because it feels like doing something. And in times like these, doing anything at all can feel like a form of control. You fill your own bucket and set it beside a flat stone. 1 cup for rinsing your face, 1 for soaking your crusty socks, and a splash for scrubbing your fingernails with a sliver of precious smoky soap. You wince, it stings a little. The dirt's gotten deep this week. Historians still argue how common true personal grooming was for peasants like you. Some accounts suggest weekly scrubbing, others only on feast days or holy events. But from where you stand, you clean when the weather allows, when the fear is low, and when you remember what it feels like to not smell like old stew and wet wool. You sit in the sun and tug off your boots. They've earned their scent. You dip your feet into a basin of cold water, rubbing them down with a mint leaf and a prayer. Not quite a bath, not quite penance, something in between. You eye the village children playing nearby, heads shaved short to fight lice. One girl wears a wreath of marigolds. Whether it's fashion fragrance or flea repellent, you can't say. Maybe all 3. Fringe tidbit of the day, some medieval folk swore by urine as a cleanser, especially for laundry and wounds. You've tried it. Once. Your tunic never forgave you. As you scrub behind your ears with damp linen, you feel a strange kind of pride. You're not clean, not really, but you're cleaner. And in your world, that matters. You dust off your shirt, shake out your bedding, and drag your straw mat into the sun. Fleas hate sunlight. Or so the healer says. You suspect they just like to make you sweat before they bite. The final ritual of your hygiene week involves oil, a dab of animal fat mixed with lavender and chamomile, pressed into the corners of your beard, behind your ears, and across your cracked knuckles. It makes you smell faintly like a roasted lamb with excellent taste. You'll take it. As you sit by the fire that night, wrapped in your freshly smoked cloak, and watching the smoke twist above the roof beams, you reflect on everything you've learned. Medieval hygiene isn't about sparkle. It's about endurance, about doing what you can with vinegar ashes, mint and grit. It's about finding moments of comfort in a world full of filth, plague and superstition. And for all its backwardness, you've come to admire it. Not because it's efficient, but because it's intentional. Every combing, every handful of herbs, every splash of smoke, it's a small act of resistance against chaos. You scratch once out of habit, not infestation, and pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. Hey, you may not be clean, but tonight at least you're clean enough. And now, as the final embers settle in your imagined hearth, let's slow things down. The smoke drifts gently upward, a soft, sleepy curl vanishing into the dark thatch above. Your clothes, though rough and worn, carry the faintest breath of rosemary and wood smoke, a scent older than time and somehow comforting. Outside, the world is still. The birds have quieted. The wind has curled itself into a hush. Even the insects seem to respect the quiet moment, pausing their endless nighttime concert. You've scratched and scrubbed and soaked. You've survived the itch, the smoke and the fear, and now wrapped in your scratchy wool blanket with your straw pillow, Rustling beneath your head, there is nothing left to do. Just breathe. Let the story settle in your mind like leaves in water slowly drifting to stillness. Let the rhythm of medieval life rock you gently into rest. You are safe. You are still. And whether you're tucked inside a smoky thatched cottage or beneath your own soft sheets, the day is done. Sleep well, time traveller. You've earned it. End of script. Sweet dreams.